In this episode, I'm going to be talking about the terrible treatment that disabled people were subjected to through the 1900s. Many viewers may or should be disturbed by this content. We're doing our recording today in the shower room of a 1970s institution, once historically a rest home, but still functioning today. We chose this setting because this is the type of room that was designed for disabled people that I'm talking about in my episode today. Showers are a familiar part of the bathroom landscape, and as we discussed in episodes 1, 2 and 3, the earliest manufactured showers were designed to change the bodies, minds, morals, health and sexual appeal of individuals and populations so that they may be productive members of society. By using the ideas of French philosopher Michel Foucault to explore history, we can see how the shower became a thinkable thing, initially to cure mania, then to promote population health, and then eventually an actor in the daily activity we carry out as part of our private lives. In this episode, we will explore a period of radical change in the design and use of the shower for people deemed dangerous to the population. The design of showers for such people gives us a fascinating insight into our ideas regarding the interests of the nation versus the individual, privacy and the naked body, the production of responsible citizens, and psychopedic shower rooms. In the late 1800s, Francis Galton, cousin of Charles Darwin, who was famously connected to the idea of survival of the fittest, employed the term eugenics to argue that there was a superior stock of human and that genes, connected in his thinking to race, should be governed through marriage and breeding. These ideas had a profound effect through the Western world, justifying fascist ideas that continue to be spewed out today regarding the value of the lives of some people being greater or lesser than others. In the early 1900s in New Zealand, as in other Western nations, a eugenics discourse advocated for the removal of disabled people from their family home. Eugenics connected disabled people to the potential proliferation of defective genes within the population. Constructed as a risk to the continued existence of the intellectual class, eugenics proposed some extreme measures to remove disabled people from society, such as those described in Mark Mostert's 2002 article in the Journal of Special Education titled Useless Eaters, Disability as Genocidal Marker in Nazi Germany. However, Nazi Germany wasn't alone in advocating for the pseudoscience of eugenics. In New Zealand, newspaper articles in the early 1900s advocated for sterilisation and euthanasia, including the use of lethal chambers for imbecile children. In addition, the Plunkett Society, established to promote the health of infants, at that time excluded children from their services who would grow up to be an imbecile or mentally defective. They argued that it would be best if such children did not survive. Research regarding the fate of disabled children connected to a eugenics discourse is harrowing, and I refer to these ideas throughout my study. However, my focus in this episode is the idea of collecting disabled people together into confined spaces so that they would be separated from the community. In 1905, New Zealand's Eugenics Society suggested that town planning should be used to improve the health of the nation by isolating undesirables in large state-funded institutions to prevent them from breeding. At this time, Finlay, the recently retired Attorney General of New Zealand, was of the view that such investment was necessary, even if it involved great expense. Processes to identify the degenerate and establishing large permanent homes in which to permanently exclude them were approved by New Zealand health boards, educators and business networks. One of the main concerns that justified this segregation was that degenerates, the unfit, defined as those who through age or infancy, illness or mental or physical abnormality would fare badly in the cosmic struggle for life, or the feeble-minded, or feeble-minded women in particular, would multiply if they were to remain free in society. In 1925, New Zealand's infamous Committee of Inquiry into Mental Defectives and Sexual Offenders considered such unrestricted multiplication of the feeble-minded as a serious menace to the wealth and happiness of the nation. They stated, "The committee are of opinion that the unrestricted multiplication of feeble-minded members of the community is a most serious menace to the future welfare and happiness of the Dominion, and it is of the utmost importance that some means of meeting the peril should be adopted without delay. The position is the more serious because, while the feeble-minded are extraordinarily prolific, there is a growing tendency among the more intellectual classes for the birth rate to become restricted." As discussed in episode 3, the control of who has sex is an important strategy in governing populations. And as Foucault explained, the bourgeois were concerned about the sexuality of the work class being precocious, active, and ever-present in the 1800s. The idea of the eugenics in the early 1900s meant degenerates and feeble-minded were thought to pose a similar threat. Cases of families were described by the committee to illustrate the connections between lineage, the production of criminals, the poor, the diseased, the morally corrupt, failure at school, feeble-mindedness, and financial costs to the state. The idea of the interests of the nation being pitched against the interests of a subset of the population was expressed through dollars and cents. The financial cost of just one degenerate family in the US was proposed to be more than $1.3 million in 1 year, according to Triggs in 1925. That's the equivalent of 21 million in today's currency. Employing biopolitical disableism, such cases were used to create the idea of an unfavourable species who should be excluded from life. Foucault described exclusion from societal life as a form of indirect murder. He referred to it as to let die, and is associated with his idea of biopolitical racism, but which I have used the term biopolitical disableism. Within a eugenics discourse, disabled people became constructed as a population of bodies with defective genes that were unfit and a danger to society. This danger was seen to rationalise the state's involvement in determining where and how they should live. In the case of all feeble-minded persons living outside institutions, whether with relatives or otherwise, the state should, in the interests of both such feeble-minded individuals and of society, have the ultimate right of supervision. Their exclusion from life was argued to be necessary for both the security of society and those being excluded. Institutional care is necessary for mentally defective persons whose helplessness or antisocial traits would render them either the victims of the unscrupulous or a menace to society. Such individuals should be segregated in farms and industrial colonies so that not only is the community freed from the responsibility of their presence, but they themselves are afforded opportunity of leading much happier and more useful lives and of becoming, to some extent, self-supporting. Advocates for eugenics argued that segregation into large permanent homes was advantageous for both the defective and their family. For example, in 1923, Minister of Health Maui Wiramu Piti Naira Pomare suggested that placement in a permanent home would make the defective happier, more useful and self-supporting, and would lighten the burden which their care and control places on the conscience and resources of the community. He suggested that large permanent homes would function as a utopia in which the defective could be trained for some simple employment, could avoid coming into conflict with the law, and would not have to suffer from the knowledge of their unfavourable state. The advantage for the family was that the defective relative would be hidden from society, protecting the family from the assumption that they were the carriers of defective genetics, revealed through the mental or physical abnormality that their family member displayed. The Committee of Inquiry into Mental Defectives and Sexual Offenders agreed with Pomare, proposing that to leave subnormal children in normal schools not only impeded the progress of the class, but removed the chances of self-respect and happiness for such children, leading them feeling themselves to be aliens. Teachers were also reported as believing normal classrooms were dangerous for defective children, and that allowing defective children in the classroom was unfair to normal children. Newspapers reported, "A teachers' conference, now sitting in Auckland, advocates the establishment of subnormal schools for the education of mentally defective children. It is not fair to normal children that they shall be thrown into intimate association with children of defective intelligence. It is not fair to defective children that they shall be exposed to the undoubted risk of overpressure that must result when they are taught with normal pupils." Indeed, children became a target of particular interest to those who would argue for state control over life. While the Teachers' Conference had focused on the mentally defective child, which might be limited to those with intellectual or psychological issues, the Mental Defectives and Sexual Offender Committee of Inquiry cast a wide net when identifying populations of children who present problems. To quote from the Mental Hygiene Bulletin published by the National Committee for Mental Hygiene for the United States of America, children showing definite problems are selected for more intensive study and treatment. The grossly mentally handicapped children who is likely to become a social problem if not dealt with properly in childhood. The psychopathic and mentally maladjusted child who later in life may develop mental disease. The child manifesting conduct disorders, which may be the beginning of a delinquent or criminal career. The retarded child, the epileptic, the child with speech deficit or with some physical disability, the child with gross personality difficulties, the exceptionally brilliant child, all present problems that demand attention during the child's school life. While the discourse was primarily related to the child, intelligence testing cast the net even wider by suggesting that adults who performed poorly in such tests indicated that a lower mental age thus connected them to the need for state attention. The committee argued that these children and adults reconstructed as having the mental age of children needed to be identified and examined by experts, since only those fully qualified to estimate accurately all the evidence available are fitted to decide the destiny of children. Once examined and classified, where such children should be schooled and where they should live could be established. Categorizing is an important feature of governing populations. Foucault refers to them as grids of specification. Various category of problem child connected them to a variety of institutions deemed suited to them. These included the ordinary public school, for the child who has been handicapped by illness, a lack of opportunity, or the child who is inherently dull and backward. In an ordinary school, he may associate with his normal fellows in preparation for life in society, but where the curriculum is modified with the object of making him a useful member of society. Residential or live-in schools were preferable for children who lived in homes that were unsuitable or too distant from specialist services, for children who were delinquent or whose capabilities were unclear. The feeble-minded included children with either mental or physical deficit, or both, who could be sent to a special school. However, for those who the normalising function of the special school could not be realised, segregation within a large permanent home was recommended. The special school is to be regarded as a training centre for such feeble-minded children are as expected as a result of the training received there to be fitted to take place in the community and to perform useful work under adequate supervision. There is a danger of filling special schools with children whose poor mental endowment renders them incapable of receiving benefit at all commensurate with the energy and expense devoted to them. Such children are subjects for custodial institutions. The large permanent home was for the subject who was considered permanently mentally or physically deficient, while other populations could be connected to disciplinary spaces in which they may benefit from the energy and expense of training. Children destined for the large permanent home were seen as not warranting such expense. While the idea of the institution being a utopia was employed, taking them into custody functioned to protect the state from their defective genes and the burden that their care placed on the economic interests of society. It was a place for them to be guarded both from and for society, and to be hidden from the nation's conscience. It was what Foucault would call a heterotopia, a place for exclusion from life, an alternative community for those who were deemed a depreciation of the nation's capital. A heterotopia is a concept that I draw on in a number of my following episodes. Foucault explained that there are places that do exist and that are formed in the very founding of society, which is something like counter sites, a kind of effectively enacted utopia in which all the real sites, all the other real sites that can be found within a culture, are simultaneously represented, contested, and inverted. Places of this kind are outside of all places, even though it may be possible to locate them in reality. Because these places are absolutely different from all the sites they reflect and speak about, I shall call them, by way of contrast to utopias, heterotopias. While large institutions were promised to be utopias, spaces outside of society within which disabled people would live, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, a group of parents resisted the removal of their children from their family home, giving birth to IHC, or what was the Intellectually Handicapped Children's Parents Association. I will talk about this association further in episode 8. However, the idea of exclusion was a powerful one that was not easily toppled by such resistance at that time. So what came of this vision for the exclusion of defectives from society? Was it simply an awful idea, lost now in the distance of time? In 1979, the New Zealand government's Hospital Design and Evaluation Unit, or the HDEU, published their study of Psychopedic Services hospital facilities, a study of inpatient accommodation. And that shows that large permanent homes had indeed materialised and were being maintained and developed until at least the early 1970s. By the time of the HDEU study, the idea of eugenics had, for the most part, fallen out of favour, and a new way of governing the disabled, one that promised individualisation and self-responsibility, had been established. 20 years earlier, in 1953, the World Health Organization took an interest in the accommodation and care of patients in institutions and produced a report on the community mental hospital. An expert committee reported that people with psychiatric disorders filled about 40% or more of total hospital beds in Western Europe and North America, creating a major health problem. The problem of enough beds is indeed something still talked about today. Since the eugenics discourse of eliminating defective genes within the population had been largely abandoned, the conversation had now returned to the need to reduce the cost of maintaining them in hospital beds. The World Health Organization report continued to advocate for the provision of large permanent homes, as did New Zealand's Hospital Act, established around this time. However, the authors proposed that the architecture and location of the facilities in the mid-1900s must maintain a connection with society. The Community Mental Hospital report was critical of the exclusion from life that large permanent homes were associated with. The authors argued that rather than the community mental hospital being a custodial space where those who were a danger to society could be guarded and hidden permanently, it should be a therapeutic community. a discourse of the architecture of the space being modelled on a community called for smaller spaces in which individuality could be promoted. If the hospital is to become a therapeutic community, as the committee is convinced it must to be successful, it must model its architecture and its plan on that of a community. If it is to support and recreate the sense of individuality in patients, it must not dwarf them by its size and by herding them together in thousands in giant monoblock buildings. They proposed that the atmosphere of the mental hospital is the most important single factor in the efficiency of the treatment given. As I discuss in my thesis, by 1953, significant changes to the way that Western societies were being governed had been established, associated with a Fordist disciplinary society, as described by Fraser in the Constellations Journal in 2003. Fraser explains that the Fordist disciplinary society takes strategies of disciplining populations that had been used in institutions such as army camps, schools and prisons, and disperses discipline through society. Rather than the drill officer, teacher or prison guard enforcing discipline, in the Fordist society, strategies are developed for the subject to become their own discipliner. As Foucault emphasised, advocates of societal control sought to foster self-activating subjects capable of internal self-governance, wagering that such subjects would be more rational, cooperative and productive than those directly subordinated to external authority. Fordist reformers devised new organisational forms and management practices. The overall thrust was to subjectify individuals. A Fordist governmentality operated discipline at a distance through a network of institutions spread throughout society. Fordism connected individuals to mass production and commodity consumption, and importantly, it was a totalizing government in which gender norms, family forms, home and community life, age and body regimes, and even entertainment were connected to the disciplinary network. A major feature of the Fordist disciplinary society was the proliferation of social work, psychotherapy, and psychology services to enlist subjects as agents of disciplinary discourse. The overall thrust was to subjectify individuals, to encourage linguistification of their internal processes as a means of holding them responsible for those processes, thereby augmenting their capacities for self-policing, effectively conscripting individuals of agents of social control while at the same time promoting their autonomy. Fordist discipline sought to replace external coercion with internal self-regulation. By the mid-1900s, we see a radical change in the treatment of mental illness. Rather than attempting to discipline the vessels of the hot brain through cold water shock, as discussed in episode 1, 1950s psychiatry aimed to transform patients by maintaining their connections to the disciplinary society from which they had come and returning them to that society. Therapy would operate through the architecture and atmosphere of a community and would produce self-respecting individuals. Another important element in the creation of this atmosphere is the preservation of the patient's individuality. In too many psychiatric hospitals, still, the patient is robbed of her personal possessions, her clothes, her name, and, should her head be lousy, even her hair. Every step, therefore, that can encourage the patient's self-respect and sense of identity should be taken, even at the cost of considerable inconvenience. Here, the patient is constructed as a subject whose belongings and body, material and human capital, are their own territory, the possessions of an individual who must be encouraged to maintain responsibility for them. While the experts advocated for the continuation of contained collective spaces, these spaces aimed to connect the subjects within to the disciplinary society, linking the hospital to the network of institutions in the community working towards the same end. The early eugenicists' vision for the custodial institution had included the idea that some form of community would develop, keeping the interned much happier and more useful. However, within the Fordist disciplinary society, social relations were enlisted as therapeutic tools, and patients were positioned to take responsibility for the production of this therapeutic community. As an example, if patients protest against inaction and boredom, they should be encouraged to create clubs for the organisation of workshops, series of conferences, musical groups, and various instruction courses. In this way, the patients are gradually led to accept some responsibility for the general atmosphere of the hospital. They can help to transform it into a community whose way of life is better adapted to their needs because they themselves have established it. Alongside promotion of individual responsibility, a democratic governmentality is employed to induce individuals to act for a collective good. In episode 2, we discussed how an early 1900s shower room for miners illustrated the power of democratic government at a very personal level. Within a democratic governmentality, the individual has little power, so collectives, like clubs, are formed, and individuals are persuaded to tie their interests to the interests of the group, even if this means some degree of self-sacrifice. The key to governing such groups is to ensure that the collective interests are rightly understood. Within the 1950s mental hospital, associations or clubs are created to encourage the patients to tie their interests to the interests of a collective, to produce and thus be invested in their own disciplinary society within the institution. Just as the right way to govern patients is to ensure they self-govern their possessions and bodies, they are seen to possess the attributes to be conscripted within the Fordist disciplinary society as agents of social control. This shift in the discourse to individual responsibility and an aesthetic of community within the institution called the architecture of the large permanent homes built in the early 1900s into question. By 1959, segregation in state-funded facilities was falling increasingly out of favour with the experts. A further World Health Organization report on psychiatric services and architecture stated that hospital care should only be a temporary measure if the family is unable to help the patient or the patient is too disturbed for the family unit to remain reasonably stable. Here, the family is seen as the primary therapeutic tool, something I discuss further in episode 7. But should that fail, the hospital should be close to the community it serves. Rather than the deficient being excluded permanently from society, these large institutions should be regarded as a temporary treatment unit. Its focus should be to retrain the patient within a therapeutic community to meet the normal stresses of an ordinary community. Indeed, remaining within the facility became seen as dangerous, potentially making the patient incapable of returning to normal life. Despite the World Health Organization report being insistent on the benefits of connection to the disciplinary society, they maintained the idea that some incurables ought to be permanently excluded. With our present resources, we must admit that some patients, particularly those suffering from schizophrenia, are not likely to recover sufficiently for a normal life in the community to be possible. They are hampered by personality deficits, eccentricities, or persistent symptoms which are unlikely to be well tolerated in most civilized cultures, and they should reside in working settlements. Despite the reservation that not all patients could be cured, the idea that artificial associations that replicate and maintain the connection to the community was built into the architecture of the 1950s psychiatric institution. To create a community atmosphere, that patients should initially enter a group of 5 or 6, like a small family. As he improves, he will be able to mix with a ward group of perhaps 20 to 30 patients. While the facilities were still large, the recommended size for the hospital was 300 beds. These wards comprised of 2 of these small family groups. As the numbers of patients in the hospital increase, units are added that remain somewhat separate but conjoined by collective spaces that combine staff and patient facilities. Bedrooms created a space for the 5 or 6 patients to establish a small family, an artificial association of comrades. These units remained outside of society, a heterotopia in which the family home of the outside world was represented. An aesthetic of the family home was desirable to produce small family connections and to retrain the patient for community life. However, Barker et al. Advised that the hospital should not appear too much like a family home. A hospital is not a home, and a building to house 30 people cannot be the same as an ordinary home designed for a family of 4 or 5. Further, it is not really desirable or helpful to the patient to dress up the mental hospital to look like something it is not. It has a social purpose, and the patient will appreciate a certain sense of purpose in the architecture, as well as the comfort and friendliness of a semi-domestic environment. The author's design thus has features of a family home, although the scale was different to what is familiar to us today. For example, there are 6 in a bedroom, although this may have been seen in children's bedroom of large families at the time. There were 2 toilet stalls and 3 hand basins. The facilities such as a kitchen and laundry were missing. However, within the specialised mother and baby units, it was recommended that there be a small area for occupational therapy. Instead of workshops outside the hospital, there will be a domestic training area. Here, the mother will have a replica of the domestic interior appropriate to her culture, in which she can function as a housewife and receive any training in cooking, hygiene, or family care that is needed. The unit had a shower and a bath, a combination that was being promoted for private dwellings at that time. This was a hygiene shower, a private cell for washing the body. It was designed to perform the same therapeutic operations of the shower in the family home, vastly different in design to the late 1800s psychiatric centre shower discussed in episode 1. The shower of the 1950s psychiatric unit was designed to produce subjects who habitually attended to their hygiene needs and who, with their clean, healthy, upright, desirable bodies could be retrained and returned to the community as a more favourable subject. While it was argued that some aspects of the units should not be dressed up to look like something they were not, the hygiene shower, by now established in the family home, could be inserted back into the mental hospital, helping to produce the comfort and friendliness of a semi-domestic environment. While the therapeutic operations of the shower within mental hospitals still aimed for normalisation, or retraining to meet the normal stresses of an ordinary community, the operations were quite different to the psychiatric hospital of the 1900s. Rather than the cold shock shower transforming the hot brain or the impetuous will, the shower was connected to the mental hospital as a feature of the domestic hygiene shower within the family home of the disciplinary society. It was a space within which the patients could be showerers, being subject to the same forces of society that compelled the rest of the population to shower. The body, and its hot brain, disordered mind or defective genes, was no longer the site of disorder. Dysfunction became a failure to manage the stresses of community life and the breakdown of family relationships. Abnormality came to be seen as social rather than corporal. Families, the community, society, and the patients within small families became part of the production of subjects who could be retrained to become responsible for themselves and to leave the state-funded facility. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, this combination of concerns regarding the costs of institutions and maintaining connection to community life would eventually see nationwide deinstitutionalisation of psychiatric patients. However, we will now return to the institutions that were established for the feeble-minded children in the early 1900s to see how some of the same ideas of shifting responsibility were applied, but the idea of the large permanent home remained. In the early 1900s in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the idea of the psychopedic hospital emerged as a space for specialised medical care for intellectually handicapped children. Psychopedic is a uniquely New Zealand term. The pedic distinguished between adult and child psychiatry, and reportedly, the New Zealand medical fraternity came up with the term psychopedic to differentiate between those who were mentally ill and those who were mentally retarded. While some special schools had been designed for children, many feeble-minded children had been living in psychiatric hospitals since their removal from the family home. A discourse of exclusion and the need for large permanent homes for such children was not in question in the late 60s, although the size of the facility, its character and connection to community, and the need for a comprehensive scheme of services was. There had never been any argument, he said, on the need for the psychopedic hospital or regional hospital for the mentally retarded, as some would prefer to call it. But there was room for discussion on its size, its location, its character, and its integration into a comprehensive scheme of services for the mentally retarded. In this discourse, large permanent homes were constructed as a problem and small unit type villas were needed. Given that the large permanent homes of the early 1900s were for removing disabled people from society's conscience, it is perhaps not surprising that there is little information about what happened with these institutions or how they were designed. However, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, investigations into the numbers of people in large permanent homes were commissioned. This renewed interest in where and how disabled people live led the HDEU into various large permanent homes that had been established over the preceding 59 years, revealing what had been previously hidden from the community's conscience. While the Psychopedic Hospital may have been established for intellectually handicapped children, the 1979 study found that the villa accommodated both adults and children and included what they called multi-handicapped patients. The HDEU visited 4 hospitals that provided large permanent homes for psychopedic patients. Each hospital had a number of villas designed to accommodate up to 50 patients, although apparently the numbers had been reduced by 1979. The oldest hospital had 2 villas built in 1920 and 1925. This villa, built at the time that the eugenics discourse was advocating for the removal of disabled people from society, collects disabled people together into large collective spaces. The residents spend their days and nights all together in the same room. A large ablution block offers no privacy for showerees. The ablution block is a group shower room, very different to the private bathroom of the family home. All the other villas, built between 1930 and right up until 1970, similarly had these shared large bathing areas. This review of hospitals found that none of the shower facilities within the villa met the reviewer's standard. A lack of privacy appeared to be particularly problematic. With the exception of Villa D1, bathrooms contained more than 1 bath and/or showers, no attempt having been made to give patients privacy. The emphasis was rather on throughput and ability of staff to assist each other. At any one time, there could be a number of patients and staff in the room, especially when individual nurses were allocated specific tasks, such as undressing patients, washing, drying, and dressing them. As these tasks were performed at different rates, a group of 4 or 5 naked or scantily clad patients could be standing or sitting, waiting to be bathed, and a comparable number perhaps waiting to be dried, dressed, or escorted back to the day room. While the HDEU does not support this bathing system, it was clear that bathrooms could not be tightly planned. Space was required for accessories such as shelving or trolleys to hold toilet requisites, clothing and clean linen, soiled linen rounders, and sometimes plinths for drying and dressing patients. As with other collective showers, such as the Army Division shower bath facility, the changing rooms and baths for miners, and the Army shower, the shower within the villa functioned as an economical way to maintain the hygiene of a population. The patients were primarily a feature of the nurse's environment, a component of the showering task to be completed as efficiently as possible. The shower design produced patients queuing to use facilities, assembly line bathing, all of which helped to produce the institutionalized patient. However, while the HDEU does not support this bathing system, the necessary presence of objects meant that the report found that the tightly planned hygiene showers of the private dwelling were not possible. These economical collective shower spaces, with an emphasis on throughput, were the materialization of Paul Murray's 1923 vision for the large permanent home as a space to lighten the burden which the care and control places on the conscience and resources of the community. The materiality of the showers within the villa made the discourses they were the product of durable. In a discourse where the patient is an object within the environment of the nurse, the walls, doors, and curtains that might create privacy for an individual to shower in simply present barriers to the assembly line of bathing. By the late 1970s, the ideas and practices that the large permanent home shower maintained appeared problematic in their failure to provide privacy. While a concern with privacy could have been problematized from the perspective of the danger of the patient's proclivity towards what Foucault would describe as a precocious, active, and ever-present sexuality, it was the inhumanity of seeing the naked or scantily clad patient, standing or sitting, waiting to be processed, that was viewed as unacceptable. Though showering in some collective spaces remained acceptable, such as the sports club showers discussed in episode 2, nakedness was dangerous and should not be seen in the public spaces of the large permanent homes. Within a discourse of collective confined spaces producing individualized disabled people connected to the Fordist disciplinary society, the right to privacy, or perhaps the right to be protected from nakedness in public, was established. Robbing the patients of the possibility of self-governing their privacy comes to be seen as inhuman. Sammy Cole, in his 2014 article Power, Knowledge, and the Subjects of Privacy, Understanding Privacy as the Ally of Surveillance, wrote, "Like sexuality, privacy involves the acquisition of rights, the diffusion of values, and the development of statements that regulate its implementation. In this sense, privacy, like sexuality, is power knowledge, related to the moral standards of defining what privacy should be. Biopower is producing subjects owning a privacy, feeling concerned about it, and willing to protect it. Rights are connected to possession of territory and the capital that can be extracted from that. In addition to public spaces as the territory of a population who needs to be protected from the danger of sex, autonomy over one's body produces a territory that self-governing subjects should defend. A sexuality that is capital becomes connected to privacy. Standing or sitting while naked or scantily clad is contradictory to the production of a subject who has a right to privacy and can self-govern their sexuality. The naked body exposes their sexuality, making it visible, vulnerable, and knowable to anyone who sees it. So it is interesting that the large permanent homes that were constructed due to a eugenics discourse of the danger of the sexuality of defectives, that the shower spaces within such institutions expose naked subjects to each other. It is perhaps that the idea that constructed adults as feeble-minded children through the assessment of their mental age meant that within the disciplinary space of the custodial institution, the problem of sex was seen to be secondary to the production of spaces for supervision and economical care. Furthermore, this is a population that was subjected to unconsented sterilisation, which may have meant that staff were not concerned with their reproduction. Within the psychopedic villa, the idea of the right to privacy did not, however, extend to a right not to be surveilled. The privacy that the HDEU felt was lacking was a specific form of privacy, a particular moral standard that allowed them to define what privacy should be within such institutions. While some of the villas had confined private dwelling-style shower cells, these were also seen as problematic, as they did not allow staff to surveil patients. The HDU reported that in most other villas, showers were of the usual domestic type. However, there was restricted access and/or restricted associated dry areas. Staff felt they could not adequately supervise patients using them. A number of other unsatisfactory features were noted, such as fixed shower heads instead of handheld sprays, no or poor water temperature control, no handrails, and raised upstands at the thresholds. While it was not desirable for groups of 4 or 5 naked or scantily clad patients to be standing or sitting around, it was also unsatisfactory for the patient's right to privacy to reduce their visibility to staff or to make the shower inconvenient for the nurse to wash the patient. It may have become desirable for disabled people to take some responsibility for their privacy, but the therapeutic operations of the shower must continue to enable the medical gaze to surveil and thus discipline the patient. The entirely concealed space of the private dwelling hygiene shower made it unsuitable for the psychopedic hospital. Other features of the private dwelling form of shower as a feature of the nurse's environment were also problematic. While the HDEU problematized the existing shower facilities of the villa, they also observed that bath time, which included showering within all of the villas, was an operator of pleasure. It was obvious that bath time was one of the most pleasurable events in the patient's day, as they clearly enjoyed the feel of water. However, the time that they were in the bathroom and were actually being washed depended on many factors. Although the existing shower designs may have been problematic, the experience of showering or bathing was not necessarily so. Indeed, not showering for long enough was seen as an issue. Observations of showering found that nursing practices caused patients to be under the water for anything between 2 and 15 minutes. Those who had the longest shower or bath were either those who were multi-handicapped and who needed braces and splints to be fitted, or those who required very little supervision and who bathed in a leisurely manner. Those bathed in groups had the shortest times, while nurses' training, scheduling of bathing, and the design of facilities were all thought to be factors contributing to these less desirable short showers. In light of all these problems, the HDEU proposed an ideal shower room. In the psychopedic shower room, there were 2 shower cells, similar to the private dwelling hygiene shower cell. These showers had shower spray handpieces so that the nursing staff may contain the direction of the water. Rather than a curtain, there was a 750mm high removable splash guard to prevent water from splashing out onto the floor and onto the nursing staff. In addition to the shower cells, the shower room provided space for the objects involved with showering patients, such as shawls and linen. The shower was no longer the tightly planned private dwelling shower. The cell became the entire room where a shower trolley, soiled linen, and clothes may be placed. It was unlike the domestic bathroom, which may contain a bath and vanity with the shower as an appendage, like Gerard's 1908 rain bath compartment. It was a space exclusively for undressing and showering, drying and dressing. However, in this room, the shower tray was entirely absent and the entire floor of the room sloped towards the drainage channel. The room accommodated 2 upright patients who might take some responsibility for themselves as a private showerer within a cell, or 2 children who could stand and be showered by the nurses. The psychopedic shower room also accommodated the reclining patient, the body who could not stand erect within the domestic shower cell. However, rather than soaking in a bath, the reclining body could be manoeuvred on a shower trolley into the bathroom assembly, under and out of the shower as directed by the nurse, with the shower spray handpiece. While the HDEU 1979 report advocated for the development of community or family homes, the idea of confined collective spaces of between 20 and 24 patients remained. The shower cells of the psychopedic shower room operated to provide some privacy between the patients. However, the absence of a door or curtain in the opening of the cell meant that the patient remained visible to anyone in the shower room who was not showering. The HDEU stated that the room should only be used by 2 children for whom apparently the requirement for privacy was less, perhaps as their bodies are thought to not expose a sexuality, or 1 adult. The dressing and drying space is collective if there are 2 showerers. While this may be rationalised by the requirement for privacy for children to be less, it is likely that democratic surveillance by one's comrade was also being employed. Indeed, Gerard, the inventor of the rain bath compartment for a single showerer, discussed in episode 3, had advocated for a shared drying and dressing area for children, as this fosters habits of neatness as regards to undergarments. Although there were 2 shower heads, the room was to function as one facility, an expanded rain bath compartment that could accommodate upright and reclining bodies. For the adult, nakedness in the collective space of the large permanent home was dangerous, and as such, the sexuality of the subject must be governed. In the disciplinary society, the subject who can take some responsibility for this government should be produced. In the cells of Dalabost's prisoner ablution system, which we explored in episode 1, torture showers to cure mania, and Brezhnevin's Army Division shower bath facility, as discussed in episode 2. The surprising history of shower rooms saw the shower cell as architecture that would improve the efficiency of external surveillance. The cell system was part of the panopticon, which Foucault described as an architectural expression of disciplinary control. However, within a discourse regarding the production of a self-governing showerer, the cell also, importantly, produced a subject who could look out and surveil whoever might look in. The creation of shower cells within collective spaces separated individuals within the institution from each other. The shower cell provided the shower with a defined space, a territory that they may defend. In a space in which some disabled people may be able to shower or trained to shower with very little assistance, the individual shower cell is justified. Responsible for governing sexuality may be somewhat shifted to the subject through establishing private territory in which they may wash out of sight of any other member of the population. However, the privacy of these showers within a collective space did not extend to placing limits on the visibility of the subject to the nurses. The psychopedic shower room is designed to produce the possibility of separating showerers from each other while remaining a space for nursing work and surveillance. It is a discursive object in which self-governing individuals with associated privacy rights and duties within large permanent homes have become problematized. The shower is a therapeutic operator. The walls and doors put the governmentality into operation. The shower makes material the aim of producing new subjects who are individualized and may take some responsibility for the government of themselves while remaining under the supervision of medical authority. In this episode, we've discussed how the large permanent home as a collective confined space for disabled people emerged within the dispositif as a way to reduce the cost of units of unsound physical and mental health to the nation. A eugenics discourse employed biopolitical disablism to construct the genes of feeble-minded children and other defectives as a risk to the security of the state. Containing such subjects in large permanent homes was argued to protect the interests of the individual and the nation. This discourse made the removal of disabled children from their family home to custodial care in a facility such as the psychopedic hospital a thinkable thing. Showers were established in these large permanent homes as they had in other collective confined spaces as a biopolitical technology to maintain the health of a population. Gathered together and isolated from the community disabled people came to be governed as a feature of the nurse's work environment, a unit within an assembly line of showers, creating the least expense to the conscience and capital of the nation. Resistance to this practice of exclusion from life and the extension of the Fordist Disciplinary Society into the mental hospital resulted in a strategic elaboration of the dispositif, whereby the large permanent home is shifted from a space of exclusion into part of a network of spaces that aim to produce self-responsible individuals. This governmentality supported the idea of the individual's body as a territory that they could govern and promoted the idea of privacy within large permanent homes. These shifts can be seen through the problematization of the large permanent home shower. Concerns regarding a lack of privacy in large collective shower spaces were associated with the production of self-governing subjects. The continuation of disciplinary practices of nurses surveilling made it clear that there were limits to the private territory of patients. The HDEU 1979 Psychopedic Shower Room provided shower cells within a large shower room. While it was possible for 2 children to be showering at once, the designers promoted it as a single facility for a showering adult. Provision of the shower cell and space to dry and dress satisfied a discourse of the right to privacy, while the absence of doors satisfied the established disciplinary surveillance of the custodial institution. It was also a space in which the reclining disabled person, connected to a shower trolley, may be wheeled in and showered by a nurse. While shower rooms had existed previously within large permanent homes as spaces in which disabled persons could be assembly line showered, the HDEU Psychopedic Shower Room produced the possibility of a single reclining subject being showered in private. Such subjects were still attended to by a nurse, but the shower design transformed the exclusion from life space of the large permanent home shower into a facility that was coherent within the disciplinary society and where disabled people could continue to live. In episode 8, we will return to the idea of the permanent home and the shower room within domestic dwellings. However, in the next episode, we will explore the discourses that connected disabled people to private dwellings and the showers that were associated with such discourses. We will see how a rehabilitation discourse emerged within the dispositif to transform the eugenics units of unsound physical and mental health so that they could become assets to the nation and return to the family home in the community.